Okay, so I want to talk about the Kate Wagner story, and more specifically her 5,000-word essay about Formula One that was deleted and disappeared from the internet almost as soon as it was published. And I want to talk about it in the wider context of what's happening in the media landscape right now with Formula One. And the reason you're probably hearing about this story for the first time is because the thing that's happening in Formula One right now, which is there is an incredible amount of noise, meaning that the important stories are more often than not getting lost within the noise. And to be very clear, when I mean noise, I don't mean the story itself. For example, what's happening right now and what's been happening for the past 3 to 4 weeks with the Christian Horner allegations, the story itself is absolutely not noise. But the coverage of it has felt, to me anyway, very much noisy versus actual, integral, important, unbiased, thought-provoking, intelligent coverage of something that feels incredibly important. And in my opinion, again, almost all of the motorsports media outlets have skirted the issue and covered it as basically as they possibly can without getting in trouble for not actually talking about the issue. Maybe with the exception of a few like Luke Smith at The Athletic, who posted a story recently about how we cannot move forward from this or move past this without actually addressing the issue at hand. And so there is one story that went, in my opinion, very much untold that happened in this past week, which was Kate Wagner was commissioned to write a piece, wrote a piece, the piece got published, the piece got taken down very mysteriously within an hour, and it has actually also now found a new home. But it speaks volumes, I think, about the media landscape in Formula One that we are experiencing right now. So Kate Wagner, who is a sports journalist better known for covering cycling, was invited by a Formula One sponsor, specifically a sponsor of the Mercedes Formula One team, namely Ineos, to cover the Austin GP of last year, so of 2023. She was asked by Road and Track, who essentially commissioned her to write a 5,000-word essay on her experience, an experience that was fully funded and fully paid for by Ineos as a sponsor. But last week, more or less as soon as it was published, her piece behind F1's Velvet Curtain was taken down about an hour after it was published, which is not something that often happens in the media landscape. A lot of people notice this, especially because a lot of people praised her essay and her article being very interesting and something maybe that we hadn't quite seen with all of the hype that's happening around Formula One. It was definitely a critical essay. And here's the other thing is, it wasn't perfect, in my opinion. I agreed with a lot of things. I disagreed with a lot of things. And I think this is something also about media literacy is for you to enjoy a journalist or an opinion writer, you don't actually have to agree with every single piece that they write. And here's the other thing is, Kate Wagner, anyone who's ever read a single one of her pieces, and I wasn't that familiar with her work prior to this event, will know that she is a diehard socialist. She's very critical. She puts on a critical lens. She does not do puff pieces. And she is going to absolutely write the story the way she experiences it. And again, because the piece that she wrote was somewhat critical, to say the least, and there are definitely some paragraphs that I can only imagine rubbed a handful of people the wrong way, especially if you weren't expecting such a piece. And look, this is to be expected. This is what happens when you don't do pay to play, when you are actually left to your own devices to be able to write the experience that you have. We see this all day, every day with content creators. However, and we'll talk about this, it gets a little murky when there's payment involved, which is one thing. And in this case, she's very clear about how everything that she experienced was paid for, and she probably wouldn't have experienced all of this if it weren't for Ineos paying for her trip. And now, as of a day ago, her piece that was taken down actually found a new home with Escape Collective. There's also a very interesting note from the editors here about why it was taken down, where it was first published, and why it's now here, which I think adds a lot of context for all of us. Before we talk a bit more about why I think this story speaks volumes about the Formula One media landscape that we're experiencing right now, there's one thing worth pointing out. I saw a lot of criticism about Kate that she accepted this, knew that it was all paid for, kind of knew what she was going to get with this VIP all-inclusive experience at the Austin GP, and still wrote this very critical piece. And the criticism that I have been seeing is she should get off her high horse. Here's the thing with sports, motorsport, and Formula One. There is no high horse to get off of. The bar right now for doing the right thing in this industry is on the floor. So at best, we're getting on a Shetland pony, not a horse. But that feels important because truly there isn't a high horse, in my opinion, to get off of. And here's the other thing, is I truly believe that one can be incredibly critical about something whilst also being incredibly optimistic about a space or an industry. I think these types of criticisms help us move forward and help us make an industry that we love better. But we need to allow for that criticism. So why am I talking about this? Because I think this story highlights a couple of things that I've seen shifting in the Formula One media landscape. The first thing that I realized the other day that actually took me way too long to realize is Formula One journalists are not writing for the everyday fan. Formula One journalists are 100% writing for themselves, for their peers, and potentially a handful of people inside of Formula One. That is who they are trying to impress. That is who they want their target demographic and target audience to be, which is why I think within the Formula One media landscape, we're getting this type of coverage that doesn't feel like it's speaking to the average day-to-day Formula One fans, because it's not actually meant for you or for us. Will that change anytime soon? I don't actually think so. But what is interesting is with all of the hype around Formula One, we've gotten increasingly more diverse coverage of the sport, which I think is really exciting. Secondly, and tied to that last point, is Formula One has been pretty notorious of not catering to journalists, unlike I think what we see a lot in the beauty and the fashion space. And when I mean F1, I don't mean the teams or their sponsors. I mean F1 as an organization has been notorious of, we are not going to wine and dine you. You can come, you can experience Formula One, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a writer, whether you're a celebrity, but we are not going to wine and dine you, which again, I actually think is not a bad move. That being said, with an increasing amount of people outside of Formula One and outside of the motorsport space interested in this, they might have to shift that ever so slightly. Here's the other thing why I also believe that it's easier for non-F1 journalists to maybe be more critical, and I don't say this in a way that should take away from their responsibility, but non-F1 journalists are not having to walk the corridors of the paddock every other week and stare these people in the face. I also think that this means that they have a lot more empathy for what's actually happening inside the paddock and during race weekends with the team principals, with the team dynamics, with the drivers. On the flip side of that, that also means that non-Formula One journalists, it is easier for them to be critical. It's easier for them to take an outside bird's-eye view from what's happening, but it also means that they probably do lack any empathy towards what it actually takes to be in this sport every single day. Which is why I believe we need this diversity of coverage so we can come at it from all angles and actually give us a more complete story. I personally have been loving reading Formula One coverage from The Cut or Harper's Bazaar or Vogue that comes at it more from maybe a fashion-forward lens or more of a feminist lens. I think that's really interesting, and there's more and more people who are writing it from the business angle as well. Again, I think all of this is good. Finally, one other thing that I've noticed increasingly is, and I think this is going to be really interesting, is the amount of sponsored content that we are seeing. Motorsports.com right now on Instagram has a influx of sponsored content that they're doing a pretty good job at flagging as sponsored content. However, some of the drivers need to get a real fast crash course on the importance of #ad when it comes to the content that has so obviously been paid for and sponsored. But that landscape, I think, is shifting incredibly fast, especially with the addition of influencers and content creators. It's important to know who's paying for what, how it's being covered, how biased is the lens, how much information these people actually have, how much is being force-fed to them, what part of it is opinion-led versus factual versus paid for, and here's a script and here's what we need you to say. And I think where I'm left with, and the broader context here for me, is as this sport grows, as more people from outside are peering in and looking in, the sport absolutely needs to be able to hold a mirror to itself and hold itself accountable. The world and the sport has shifted, but this is what gets me really excited about the next 75 years of this sport, is what does it look like? How is the media landscape and media industry going to shift the way we as fans consume Formula One? I also think this is one of the big reasons why we need more people to experience Formula One IRL. And again, that number is still really low. 1% of Formula One fans in a season will get to experience the sport. The more I feel people get to experience the sport, the more they understand it and the more they may be more empathetic or more critical. And again, I really do believe in being critical and optimistic at the same time. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Anyway, all that to say, the Kate Wagner piece should not go unnoticed. Go read it. It's incredibly well written. You're probably all not going to agree with everything that's written, but it offers a different perspective and a different lens, and one that I believe is actually valuable. And something that I always forget doing. Thank you so much for watching the video if you've come all the way to the end of it. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I appreciate your time.